What makes a rebellion and what a revolution? And what tips civil discourse into civil war? These are the questions at hand on this particular Juneteenth. 250 years since a group of revolutionaries declared that there were certain self-evident truths about the equality of all men. And 161 years to the day when the sweet land of liberty finally freed the last of its slaves on an island not far from here. How should we feel about those revolutionaries who declared liberty and dreamed into existence the first modern democracy while at the same time owned and traded other humans as property? As we prepare to celebrate 2.5 centuries since our nation declared its independence, how might we wrestle with its most shameful sin, slavery, which marred its first century and shaped so much of what has happened since? What is Juneteenth on the eve of America's semi-quincentennial? How do we remember heroes who stood in this one most significant way on the wrong side of history? These are questions not just of Juneteenth, but also of our Torah portion, Korach, named for a man who led a rebellion that never became a revolution. Korach gathers his friends Datam and Abiram and 250 chieftains of Israel to rise up against Moses and Aaron. The Torah tells us that these were men of repute, representatives of the community. They offer their complaint. You have gone too far. Is it not true that all the community is holy, all of them, and that God is in their midst? Why then do you raise yourself above God's congregation? Thank you, that was very dramatic. A showdown ensues, where the 250 rebel leaders bring offerings to God, as does Aaron. God chooses Aaron's offering and sends a fire that consumes many of the insurrectionists. And then the mouth of the earth opens and swallows the rest. Korach, Datam, and Abiram among them. So much for these men of repute. God has clearly shown what will happen to those who question the authority of God's chosen leaders. Except, what did Korach say that was so wrong? God had said that Israel should be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. Korach just takes that to its logical extreme. God said we were all created of equal holiness. How then can any man rule like a king over free and equal people? The questions Korach asked are echoed by the questions asked by our founding fathers. Their answer was that the only fair system was not monarchy, but democracy. Korach's answer, it seems, was different. Our tradition teaches that his end goal was not as democratic as his oration might seem. He only claimed to speak for the people. He was really just in it for himself. He sought not to end monarchic rule, but to replace Moses' leadership with his own. He didn't want to upend hierarchy, but just to situate himself at the top. In the end, it was not a claim about equality, but power. And that is the notion that eventually consumes him. The rabbis of the Mishnah discuss what they call a machlochet l'shem shamayyim, a dispute for the sake of heaven. They write, any dispute that is for the sake of heaven, its end is to endure, but that which is not for the sake of heaven, its end is not to endure. And the paradigmatic example of a debate which is not for the sake of heaven, they say, is the dispute of Korach and his band. As for a positive example of machlochet l'shem shamayyim, a dispute that is for the sake of heaven, they cite the debates of Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Shammai, two great scholars of the rabbinic era. Their arguments endured. The schools of their disciples continued to debate the finer points made by these two wise men for generations. Hillel and Shammai did not debate for their own power or prestige. They debated for the sake of heaven in order that they and their students could better understand God's laws. They sought not to dominate or win, but only to understand more deeply. We are told that they would teach the opinions of their opponents before their own, signifying the esteem with which they held each other. We are told that despite their different understandings of the laws of marriage, they would allow their sons and daughters to wed. This is what makes it a debate for the sake of heaven. Rabbeinu Yonah of Garandi explains the Mishnah's strange phrase, "Their end is to endure." The debate that is not for heaven's sake, those debates come to an end. But the debate that is for heaven's sake will always continue generation after generation. He says they add length of days and years of life. Those debates don't just persist, they are life-giving and life-fulfilling. Korach was swallowed by the earth, his cause abandoned. But we still study Hillel and Shammai today, their machlochet enduring across the ages so that they live on. Historian Jill Lepore teaches that though the word slavery appears nowhere in the Constitution, it hung over the entire Constitutional Convention. It was not one consideration among many, but the defining difference that wound its way into nearly every debate. And many at the Constitutional Convention declared even then that slavery was wrong and an anathema to the American ideal of freedom and independence. Pennsylvania's James Wilson called out the hypocrisy of counting slaves as property for the sake of taxation, but as people, or at least 3/5 of a person, for the purpose of representation. Gouverneur Morris of New York told his fellow constituents that the kidnapping and sale of Africans was an act in defiance of the most sacred laws of humanity. And Maryland's Luther Martin stormed out of the convention and refused to sign the Constitution, declaring that slavery was inconsistent with the principles of the Revolution and dishonorable to the American character. And yet, ultimately, these declarations went unheeded, and the Founding Fathers allowed slavery to continue despite those significant reservations. During one break in the proceedings of the convention, James Madison, who would eventually author the Bill of Rights, took time to attend to a personal matter. A slave named Anthony had run away from Madison's plantation at Montpelier. As Jill Lepore puts it, Anthony had gone looking to be 5/5 of a person. Looking towards our text from the Mishnah, we have a way to understand these complicated men, slave owners and slave recapitulators who at the same time opined about freedom and liberty. The difference between a debate for the sake of heaven and a debate for the sake of power is whether or not the debate endures. While so many of the debates of that Constitutional Convention have stood the test of time, the debate on slavery did not, even if the effects of that debate continue to have repercussions to the present day. Perhaps this is what Abraham Lincoln meant when he declared that a house divided against itself cannot stand. The Founding Fathers built a house on this most fundamental division, and less than a century later, a civil war was fought on that unstable foundation. At Gettysburg, Lincoln asked whether a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal could long endure. That was a debate for the sake of heaven, and so that is a debate we continue today. The machlochet endures. But slavery was eventually and finally banished to the dustpan of history because there's no debate in heaven about whether a man can own another man. America is, at its core, an ongoing debate. Our Founding Fathers started a conversation that we are still having to this day. It is a conversation about liberty and who should be its beneficiaries. A debate about representation and who should be counted among the populace. A debate about equality and how a nation of individuals becomes a polity. How you turn a nation of I into the people of we. These conversations endure because they are debated for heaven's sake. The rabbis wonder why the second day of creation is the only day on which God does not declare it was good. Rabbi Hanina says that it is because on the second day God created division, when God separated water from water. This was the day machlochet was created, because machlochet, debate, is at the center of creation just as it is at the center of our nation. But there is debate that divides and separates, that isolates and denigrates. For this, God will not say it is good. But there is debate that is about creation, about integration, interpretation, comprehension, and understanding. These are the debates for the sake of heaven, the ones that are very good, the ones that endure. Rabbi Avital Hochstein says that this midrash teaches that debate is not a bug in the system, but an essential part of creation. And the debate for the sake of heaven demands listening, patience, and willingness to remain in relationship even without agreement, like Hillel and Shammai, who allowed their children to marry. Unlike the debate of Korach, the space created by machlochet l'shem shamayyim is not hierarchical. No one is superior or inferior. And Rabbi Hochstein writes that a dispute whose end is to endure demands trust. Not only trust in myself, but trust in the one who disagrees with me. This is a trust that is not naive. I do not assume that the other is as right as I am, but I assume that they have a place in the world, that they too have a future. We are 2 weeks away from America's 250th anniversary. And tonight we look towards that milestone on the road ahead through the lens of Juneteenth. Through that lens, we see America not in simplicity, but in complexity, in a unity that is defined not by singularity, but by the embrace of diversity. Through this lens, we see that the founding of America was not a one-time event, but an ongoing conversation, a debate for the sake of heaven. This great debate about America is not done. It is, God willing, never done. We, the inheritors of that debate, must find a way to be in community with people with whom we disagree. And the starting place is the surety that each of us is born free with an equal share of dignity and an unalienable right of equality. 250 years ago, the founding fathers started a number of debates. Some of them were for the sake of power, but others were for the sake of heaven. May we carry the torch of their most enduring questions, so that this nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all people are created equal, may long endure. Shabbat Shalom.